Imagine waking up in the dead of night to find your roommate's bed empty, but what if they never came back? In this case, a quiet suburban home became the stage for a mystery that would baffle investigators for years. The question is, where did she go, and who was the last person to see her alive? This true crime story will take you step by step through the dark twists and turns of an unexpected disappearance. I will keep the screen dark if you are trying to sleep. Let's get to it. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, the kind that fades easily from memory. The two young women living in the modest two-bedroom apartment had spent the night like so many others, quietly and without incident. For 23-year-old Lauren Spierer, a vibrant Indiana University student, the night had begun with plans to relax, catch up with friends, and unwind. Her last class had ended hours ago, and she was eager for the informal gatherings that were a regular part of campus life. By the time her roommate, Kara, left for the evening to visit her parents in nearby Bloomington, Lauren was already busy texting friends and finalizing the evening's loose plans. Later that night, around 11:30 p.m., Kara returned home to find the apartment dark and quiet. Nothing seemed out of place at first. She assumed Lauren was either out for a late-night walk, something she often did to clear her head, or taking longer than expected to return from visiting friends. It wasn't unusual in their circle of college acquaintances to come and go at odd hours, especially during the summer months when Bloomington slowed to a relaxed pace. The air still carried the fresh bite of spring even as summer settled in, and it made those midnight strolls feel almost serene. But this time, as minutes turned into hours, the serenity gave way to something else: unease. By 2 a.m., Kara found herself lying awake in bed, staring at the empty mattress across the room. Lauren's side of the room had always been a mixture of tidy and chaotic, with notebooks stacked haphazardly next to her laptop, shoes kicked into random corners, and a half-empty water bottle perched precariously on the edge of her desk. Tonight, it looked the same as always, as if Lauren had just stepped out and would be back at any moment. Her favorite denim jacket still hung on the back of her chair, the watch she always wore was resting on her dresser, and her phone charger was looped neatly on the nightstand. But Lauren wasn't there. The small glow of a street lamp outside their bedroom window was enough to illuminate the clock on the wall. As Kara watched the hands creep closer to 3 a.m., the unease turned into a nagging worry she couldn't shake. Kara had been Lauren's roommate for long enough to know that, despite her outgoing and adventurous personality, she wasn't one to vanish into the night without saying a word. Even when Lauren was engrossed in her own plans, she kept her roommate in the loop. Running late, don't wait up, or spent too much on snacks again, see you tomorrow, were simple updates that had become part of their weekday routines. Tonight, there were no texts or calls, no updates, just the quiet hum of their apartment, broken only by the occasional soft creak of the building settling. By 4 a.m., Kara felt dizzy from scanning the same mental checklist. Was she really out? Could she have fallen asleep at a friend's place without telling her? Or worse, had she gotten hurt? The questions piled on top of one another, unanswered and overwhelming. Standing in the doorway of their room, she glanced around once more, as if the act of looking could summon her back. But Lauren's perfectly made bed, with its folded blanket at the foot, only fueled her anxiety. She flicked through their text messages, searching for some sign she might have missed. The last one from Lauren simply read, "Be back soon," sent at 9:47 p.m. It was all too ordinary, nothing that suggested anything unusual, at least to Kara's tired and racing thoughts. Hours later, as the first traces of dawn began filtering into their apartment, Kara finally picked up her phone and hesitantly dialed Lauren's number. It rang, and rang, and rang again. Voicemail. Next, she called some of Lauren's closest friends, asking if any of them had seen her. Most of them had last spotted Lauren late in the evening, leaving the apartment complex. One friend said she saw Lauren walking alone near the intersection of College Avenue, a busy corner known for its bars and restaurants. But beyond that, no one seemed to know where she had gone. Each call ended in the same sinking feeling. By the time authorities were contacted later that morning, it was already clear to Kara and to everyone else close to Lauren that this wasn't a simple disappearance. There was no sign that she had packed for a trip or intended to disappear on purpose. Her most valued belongings, her keys, wallet, and phone, were all exactly where she always left them. Her ID was still nestled in the side pocket of her bag. While Lauren valued her independence and spontaneity, she wasn't the kind of person who would wander off without taking essentials with her. And if something had happened to her, perhaps a mugging gone wrong or an accident, why had no one reported seeing a struggle, hearing a scream, or noticing someone out of place. A chill crept over Kara as she considered the possibilities. This wasn't just late-night confusion. Whatever was going on, it was far more serious than she had initially thought. When police arrived, they conducted a quick walkthrough of the apartment. Small and unassuming, it was the kind of place rented by young college students with modest incomes. The investigators examined every corner of the room for anything that might stand out. A piece of paper with a note scribbled in a hurry, a window left cracked open. Everything remained eerily static, frozen in place, as if Lauren had simply vanished. One detective later remarked that it was the kind of scene that left you unsettled. Instead of finding explanations, you were left chasing ghosts. But then came the moment that haunted her roommate most. It wasn't just the empty bed or the altogether too ordinary state of the belongings. There was no overturned furniture, no signs of a struggle. It was the shoes that stopped her cold. Lauren's shoes, the ones she wore almost every day when stepping out, still sat neatly by the front door. That detail alone sent a chill through the room. While she could have left the apartment in another pair, it was unusual and out of character for her to leave without those. It was, in essence, the kind of subtle clue investigators would later say helped reinforce one alarming truth. Lauren hadn't left that apartment for a casual errand or spontaneous outing. Something unforeseen had happened. So what now? As early as the first few hours of the investigation, detectives had but one goal: retrace Lauren's last steps. Conversations with witnesses would only help so much. They knew quickly that the physical evidence, or lack thereof, might be their best chance at uncovering her movements. What did the empty apartment hold that they had missed in those initial scans? For the police, the first critical task was piecing together the quiet mysteries left behind. But as the day ticked past and hope of finding Lauren safely began to dwindle, they couldn't escape an ominous possibility creeping into every corner of their theories. Whatever happened to Lauren Spierer that night, her disappearance was connected to someone or something skilled at evasion. What would come next would not just test the resolve of her friends and family, but challenge the very limits of the investigators on the case. So what did the investigators find when they began to search for those first critical clues? How would the quiet details of an untouched apartment speak louder than any words? The apartment stood as if frozen in time, every item meticulously locked in its place, as if still anticipating Lauren's return. Investigators arrived mid-morning, stepping into her shared living space with the kind of caution that came with experience. The small, tidy entry hall opened into a modest living room, its worn carpets and mismatched furniture giving off the unmistakable charm of a student's budget. It was clear that this space wasn't prepared for visitors but made for quiet moments spent alone or with friends. Posters of indie bands and faded family photos dotted the walls, reminders of two vibrant young women building their worlds within this little home. Yet, despite its warmth, the silence inside felt heavy, pressing down on each intruder as they worked to piece together Lauren's story. Her roommate's initial walkthrough had already suggested that nothing looked disturbed. There were no signs of forced entry. No belongings appeared to be missing, at least not at first glance. However, as investigators began their own scan of the apartment, the stillness seemed almost unnatural, as though it held something back. Everyday items could tell stories, but only if the puzzle pieces fit. It is the unseen details and the smallest, overlooked irregularities that often make the difference in a case like this. Lauren's room was the obvious starting point. Her bed, untouched and tucked perfectly, lay opposite Kara's, a reminder of just how abruptly she had disappeared. On the desk sat a notebook with its pen clipped neatly inside, next to an open laptop resting in standby mode. The only sound came from the faint hum of the refrigerator in the other room. No mugs sat abandoned on counters, no faint laundry scent lingered in the air. It was as if everything had been paused. But among this orderliness, one detail raised immediate questions. Lauren's keys, her lifeline to her apartment, her car, and her daily routine were conspicuously absent, and yet her wallet and phone sat untouched on the nightstand. Officers took note. Where were Lauren's keys? Had she taken them on her way out the door, or had they vanished with her, perhaps now sitting somewhere they didn't belong? The absence of such a fundamentally important item highlighted the very strangeness of the entire situation. It was one of the first things to suggest she hadn't consciously left intending to go far. In the kitchen, nothing appeared disrupted either. The sink was empty, the counters meticulously clean aside from a stray bracelet left by the sink. Kara confirmed it belonged to Lauren, one of her favorites in fact, though she wore it almost constantly. Most people might not have noticed it at all, but detectives instantly flagged it. One officer later commented, Leaving behind something sentimental like jewelry, it stands out. It's a subtle sign we've seen before. It suggested she wasn't acting on her usual habits when she left. Then came the living room. The unlocked front door caught the attention of the team. While some might wave off an unlocked door as forgetfulness, it felt unusual here, an indicator of something more. Kara had remembered locking the door earlier that evening, long before Lauren's "be back soon" text. Lauren, too, wasn't the sort to forget. Simple things like locking up were second nature for a woman navigating her independence among friends and strangers alike. The police marked it as another small detail that didn't line up, a crack in the otherwise normal pattern of life within this space. While forensic experts began their survey for hidden evidence, such as fingerprints, smudges, and fibers, the lead investigator paced through the apartment, processing its stillness. Personal belongings often told their own stories. In this case, it wasn't just what Lauren had taken or left behind that puzzled them, but what hadn't been disturbed. The picture frames remained undisturbed, and mail lay scattered in its usual spot on the dining table. There was no broken furniture or overturned chairs. It felt sterile, yet suffocating. The first real break arrived when Kara unearthed what she had initially missed. Digging through the shared laundry bin, she found a shirt Lauren had been wearing earlier that week, the one she typically paired with high-waisted shorts and flat white sneakers, a basic staple of her wardrobe. On closer inspection, Kara noticed faint discoloration above the hem, a reddish smear, so faint it could have been missed entirely. She hesitated before calling it to the investigators' attention. From there, it was sent to the forensics lab. Police weren't prepared to draw immediate conclusions, but officers acknowledged the significance of any potentially blood-like stain, no matter how faint. It wasn't just the mark itself. It was the question of why such a thing would exist there in the first place. Had something gone unnoticed earlier that week, or was this now a tangible connection to something darker? Outside Lauren's room, another oddity began to shape the theory of foul play. Her shoes were all accounted for. Lauren wasn't one to go far without them, especially her everyday sneakers, which still sat neatly by the door. This detail carried weight. It suggested, unequivocally, that she hadn't been planning for a long walk or errand. In the minds of the officers, it raised questions around mobility or coercion. Either Lauren had been taken, or she had left in an extremely atypical state. As details emerged from the physical space, suggesting irregularities, investigators layered professional insights into the mix. Survivability windows in missing persons cases shrank rapidly when evidence failed to signal voluntary absence. Without her keys, shoes, or any alert to her social circle, the narrative began shifting. One investigator noted, "Explaining anomalies in victims' routines is crucial in hours like this. We don't just focus on where someone might go, but why, what stays behind is unusual." These tiny inconsistencies began stacking into a mosaic too detailed to ignore. Police began looking into movements from the night before, latching on to potential explanations that could connect the gaps left behind without Lauren's presence to anchor the space. By mid-afternoon, the apartment's silence weighed heavier still, but police strategies began turning outward. Reconstructing Lauren's last known footsteps relied on the surrounding community and whoever had caught even the smallest glimpse before events turned sinister. Who, if anyone, had seen her leave through the lane-facing stairwell stretching beyond both her apartment and into public space? Kara's account of the night Lauren vanished painted a picture of normalcy, at least at first. She recalled Lauren leaving the apartment around 6:30 p.m., her phone tucked into her pocket, as she made plans to meet friends. Based on the texts exchanged earlier in the day, her evening didn't seem out of the ordinary. A few hours of catching up with friends on College Avenue before heading back home. Lauren's message, "Be back soon," was sent a little before 10 p.m., leaving Kara to assume she wouldn't be gone late. It was a routine similar to so many others. But as the details unfolded, what Kara described seemed less like a typical night and more like the beginning of a series of concerning gaps. Kara admitted she didn't think much of Lauren's absence initially. As soon as she received that text, she figured Lauren might just lose track of time, something college students often did. Kara busied herself with her own plans that evening, casually glancing at her phone every now and then, but with no real urgency. It wasn't until several hours later, past midnight, that she started to feel uneasy. Kara explained to investigators that she had sent a couple of follow-up texts, including one asking if Lauren needed a ride home. It was something they regularly did for one another, but when hours passed without any response, she tried calling, only for it to go straight to voicemail. It felt strange. Kara later recounted. Lauren wasn't the type to ignore calls, especially if she knew I was waiting for her. That was the first moment Kara felt the situation might not be typical. Yet even then, she hesitated to act. The idea of calling the police so soon seemed dramatic. What if Lauren was fine? No one wanted to overreact. Still, investigators couldn't ignore a crucial detail. While Kara claimed she felt concern creep in around midnight, it wasn't until almost 7 hours later that she decided to contact authorities. For those first hours, she tried to rationalize Lauren's absence. Perhaps she had crashed at a friend's place, or maybe her phone had died. According to Kara, these were the explanations she clung to in the middle of the night, even as her anxiety started to mount. When morning came and there was still no sign of Lauren, Kara explained that her dread reached a breaking point. "That's when I finally realized something was seriously wrong," she told detectives. This delay became a point investigators couldn't overlook. What caused her to wait so long? In many missing persons cases, especially those involving adults, reporting delays can muddy the critical first hours of an investigation. Police pressed Kara for more clarity, hoping to understand not just her actions but her thought process. Some of her answers only raised more questions. For instance, when describing how she spent those hours waiting for Lauren to come home, certain details came across as contradictory. Kara claimed she checked Lauren's favorite hangouts by texting mutual friends, but when police reviewed phone records, there appeared to be fewer outgoing messages than she had mentioned. This discrepancy wasn't conclusive, but it hinted at a potential complication in her story. Investigators started to look at her statements less as a straightforward narrative and more as a series of pieces that didn't quite fit together. One detail in particular caught their attention. Kara admitted she had noticed Lauren's shoes, her unmistakable white sneakers, sitting by the door as she paced through the apartment that night. Despite this, she still believed Lauren might have gone out walking. When pressed, she said she didn't think it was unusual at the time. "I know it sounds strange now, but I didn't put it together then," Kara remarked during questioning. Lauren had other shoes. It didn't seem like a big deal. But detectives found this reasoning hard to accept. Lauren's sneakers weren't just a favorite pair. They were practically her uniform for daily errands and nights out alike. Leaving them behind seemed out of character, and Kara's explanation felt thin. It wasn't enough to accuse her of withholding information, but it was enough to make investigators question the full picture. There was also the issue of the front door. In her account, Kara stated that she had locked the door when Lauren left earlier in the evening. Still, when the police arrived the following morning, they found it unlocked. This raised another important question. Had Kara herself unlocked it during the night, or had someone else gained access? Kara struggled to explain this inconsistency. "I must have forgotten," she told them, her voice wavering. "I honestly don't remember." To investigators, her uncertainty felt less like forgetfulness and more like an effort to avoid a direct answer. As detectives questioned Kara further, it became clear that being a witness, or even just the person closest to Lauren, was taking its toll on her. She fumbled through parts of her timeline, repeating certain details while backtracking on others. This wasn't entirely unusual. For people under the weight of police questioning, the pressure to be accurate while managing grief or confusion could lead to missteps. One officer later remarked, "It's not always about whether someone is lying outright. Sometimes the stress of the moment makes even truthful people come across as suspicious." Even so, Kara's narrative sat at the center of their investigation, and every inconsistency became a loose thread they couldn't ignore. On the surface, Kara appeared cooperative. She answered questions willingly, worked with police to identify Lauren's closest friends, and helped comb through local spots Lauren might have gone. But as they dug deeper into her accounts, small cracks began to form in the foundation of her innocence. A neighbor reported hearing what they described as raised voices near the apartment around 11 p.m., the night Lauren disappeared. While the description of the voices couldn't confirm their identities, the timing aligned too closely to dismiss. When asked, Kara claimed she hadn't heard any argument that night, maintaining her position that the apartment had been quiet. This added another layer of uncertainty. If she truly had nothing to hide, why would she downplay details that might help piece things together? The strain of being questioned only grew heavier as the hours stretched on. Kara found herself not just Lauren's last known point of contact, but also the center of investigators' doubts. Without any definitive evidence pointing her way, there was no basis for calling her a suspect outright. But her timeline, how long she waited to raise concerns, how casual her response initially seemed, was a puzzle in its own right. She insisted over and over again, I didn't think it was serious at first. I thought she'd come back. But could her belief in Lauren's safety have blinded her to the signs of danger? The nature of their relationship came under quiet scrutiny. Friends described Kara and Lauren as close, though not inseparable. They had only lived together for a year, but by all accounts, there were no deeply rooted issues between them. However, there were hints of friction in their daily lives. Small disagreements about chores or shared spaces. One friend pointed out that they were just different people. Lauren, always social and outgoing, preferred to keep a busy schedule. Kara, quieter and more introverted, enjoyed her downtime in the apartment. It wasn't enough to suggest tension beyond what most roommates experience, but the investigators wondered if a hidden rift between them could explain Kara's reluctance to act quickly. As they wrapped up their interviews with her, the detectives knew Kara's account would need further scrutiny. Her timeline of the night would soon become a focal point, not just for its inconsistencies but for what it might reveal about Lauren's last hours. One thing had already become painfully clear. Kara's hesitation, whether deliberate or not, had left them chasing a clock that wouldn't stop ticking. But as the focus shifted to their relationship, new layers of complexity began to emerge. Were there dynamics beneath the surface that could shed light on what had happened that night? And if there were secrets, how had they been hidden in plain sight? Lauren and Kara were like many roommates, brought together less by friendship and more by convenience. They met through mutual friends in their first year at Indiana University and, after briefly bonding over the need to find affordable housing, decided to move in together. By most accounts, they got along well enough. They were similar in age but wildly different in personality. Lauren was bubbly, social, and constantly surrounded by friends. Kara, by contrast, kept to herself more. She preferred quiet nights in and rarely joined Lauren on her weekend outings. Their relationship worked largely because they respected each other's boundaries. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Friends of the pair described their setup as typical. Lauren and Kara shared chores but didn't have a structured schedule. Lauren often took the lead in keeping common areas tidy, while Kara helped manage shared bills. They weren't best friends, but they seemed fine, one acquaintance said. I never got the sense there was big drama. Others echoed this sentiment. The two coexisted, but their lives didn't overlap much beyond the shared apartment. It was a practical arrangement, not a deep personal connection. Still, investigators began to wonder how well anyone truly understood their dynamics. The early stages of the case focused heavily on Kara's account, and her role as Lauren's roommate automatically placed her under a microscope. Police dug into their living arrangements, curious if unresolved tensions or issues might have played a role in Lauren's disappearance. What they discovered were subtle inconsistencies. Nothing overtly alarming, but enough to suggest the relationship wasn't as seamless as it appeared. Neighbors provided intriguing anecdotes. One described hearing occasional arguments through the thin apartment walls. It wasn't constant or violent, the neighbor clarified, but sometimes you'd hear them raising their voices at each other. Another neighbor mentioned noticing long stretches where Kara seemed to avoid Lauren entirely. It was like they had different schedules on purpose, the neighbor remarked. Kara would come home when she knew Lauren wasn't there. These accounts, while not proof of anything sinister, painted a picture of two people who shared space but sometimes barely interacted. One particular incident stood out. A few months before Lauren vanished, the two had a minor dispute over a party Lauren hosted in the apartment. Kara, who'd been studying for an exam that weekend, had reportedly stormed out after finding the living room packed with Lauren's friends. She was pretty upset, one of Lauren's friends recalled. She left without saying much and didn't come back until the next day. Police learned there were no major repercussions, no threats or lasting resentment. But the story added a layer of tension to what was otherwise considered a functional arrangement. A deeper dive into Lauren and Kara's routines revealed subtle patterns of friction. Kara seemed to value her privacy more than Lauren, and there were mild disagreements about boundaries. For example, Lauren sometimes borrowed Kara's dishes or other items without asking. Small things that Kara, according to friends, occasionally vented about but never escalated. She'd complain to us, one mutual friend said, but nothing serious. Just typical roommate stuff like, I wish she'd stop taking my things every time she has guests. When police pressed Kara about her feelings toward Lauren, she insisted there was no real animosity. We had our moments like anyone else, but we got along, she told investigators. I never felt like we were close, but that didn't mean I didn't care about her. Still, small details began to mount. Kara's hesitation to report Lauren missing, combined with her understated responses about their relationship, left investigators questioning whether there might be deeper grievances lurking beneath the surface. Psychologists brought in to consult on the case noted an important reality about roommate dynamics. Familiarity can mask friction. People living in close quarters often adapt to one another, finding ways to coexist even when tensions simmer. Hidden resentment in shared living situations is common, one expert explained. Roommates may not express every grievance aloud, but over time, those little irritations can build up. It doesn't mean someone is violent or dangerous, but it creates an emotional disconnect. This insight resonated with investigators as they examined Kara's seemingly detached behavior in the days after Lauren disappeared. Uncovering the truth about the women's dynamic wasn't just speculation. It was critical to understanding Lauren's last moments. Friends admitted that Lauren occasionally found Kara hard to read and even frustrating at times. She confided in one friend shortly after the party incident, mentioning that Kara wasn't thrilled about how social Lauren's lifestyle was. She said something like, "Kara probably thinks I'm too loud," the friend recalled. "But I figured they were fine. There were no major fights or anything." Interestingly, Lauren's friends described her as the kind of person who avoided conflict. While she thrived in social situations, she wasn't confrontational. "Lauren was nice to everyone," said one close friend. Even if someone annoyed her, she didn't like making a big deal about it. This trait only deepened the mystery. It was hard to imagine her sparking any kind of confrontation that might lead to harm. But what if the issues were one-sided? Investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that Kara may have harbored frustrations Lauren never fully realized. Investigators also uncovered a surprising piece of information midway through their inquiry. Kara had mentioned moving out just days before Lauren disappeared. According to a co-worker, she had expressed concerns about the living arrangement, saying it wasn't working out the way she'd hoped. She didn't go into details but said she was thinking about finding her own place, the co-worker revealed. Police questioned why Kara hadn't brought this up sooner. Kara's explanation was simple. She didn't think it was relevant. She insisted it wasn't about Lauren, just a desire for more personal space. Yet, the timing stood out. If Kara had been considering leaving, had tensions between her and Lauren reached a breaking point? Investigators couldn't say for sure, but the revelation added weight to the notion that their relationship wasn't perfectly harmonized. While Kara continued to cooperate with police, providing access to her phone records and interviews with mutual friends, her reserved demeanor left many wondering what emotions might be hiding beneath the surface. As investigators pieced together the details of their relationship, a clearer but more complicated picture began to emerge. Lauren and Kara were roommates by necessity, not choice. They weren't enemies, but they weren't close enough for deep trust to have developed. Their interactions were polite, even friendly at times, but there was an undeniable emotional distance between them. In the absence of a stronger bond, small moments of friction could easily go unnoticed or unaddressed. This new understanding of their dynamic led investigators to reconsider the timeline of Lauren's disappearance. If any argument or altercation had occurred that night, it could explain some of the inconsistencies in Kara's story. However, there was no concrete proof of Kara's involvement, and her cooperation thus far made it difficult to draw any direct conclusions. Still, the insights into their relationship added complexity to the case, shifting the focus onto the interpersonal dynamics that shaped both women's lives. The deeper the investigators looked into Lauren and Kara's shared history, the more questions arose. What hadn't Kara shared about their cohabitation? Were there small conflicts between them that took on more significance in the days leading up to Lauren's disappearance? And if they weren't connected to her vanishing, how might those tensions have affected Kara's choices in the aftermath? With every new development, the case grew murkier. But while the dynamics inside the apartment hinted at possible motives or explanations, the next stage of the investigation turned outward. What evidence outside the four walls they had shared could illuminate the last moments of Lauren's life? And, more importantly, would it point to someone else entirely? When Lauren Spierer's disappearance was officially reported, the clock had already cost investigators precious hours. The first 48 hours are widely considered the most critical in any missing persons case. It's the window where evidence is freshest, interviews are sharpest, and leads are easier to track down. But when investigators arrived at Lauren's apartment that morning, they weren't stepping into a clean slate. They were already fighting time and quickly realizing how much they didn't know about the last hours of Lauren's life. One of the first challenges was the delay between her disappearance and the initial report. Kara's hesitation to call police or notify friends immediately meant investigators were working with a timeline where the trail had already started to go cold. Lauren had left the apartment almost 12 hours earlier by the time officers conducted their first in-depth walkthrough. A morning lost to unmade calls and unanswered texts gave any possible witnesses a wide berth to move on with their lives, unknowingly taking key memories out of reach. The difficulty in missing persons cases often lies in the balance between concern and uncertainty. But in cases involving delays, that concern magnifies. Detective Scott Harrison, one of the leads on the case, later remarked, "You've essentially given a potential suspect half a day to move, hide, or cover their tracks. That's an eternity." Despite this setback, law enforcement strategized quickly. The first step was establishing a clear picture of Lauren's last known movements. They started with marks of certainty statements from Kara, her time-stamped messages, and sightings of Lauren at a few well-trafficked locations on College Avenue. According to witness accounts, Lauren spent the early evening visiting a nearby friend before heading out to a popular bar. By 9:30 p.m., she was reportedly seen chatting amiably with friends near the bar's front patio. But by 10:15, that same group recalled her excusing herself to take a quick walk back to her apartment before the night's plans continued. It was this window just before 11 p.m. until the early hours of the next day that became the immediate focus of the investigation. Officers canvassed the area surrounding her apartment, questioning passers-by and nearby residents. The route Lauren would have taken on foot was simple, just a straight cut through a neighborhood block. But no one seemed to have definitive answers. One neighbor recalled seeing a woman resembling Lauren walking along the sidewalk but couldn't confidently confirm the sighting. Others in the area admitted to being home but didn't hear or see anything unusual. "It's frustrating when you know someone must have spotted something," an officer reflected years later. But people don't know what they don't know. If they thought it was nothing, they'd forget it by the next morning. The police turned to local businesses along the route, hoping for luck with surveillance cameras. But this effort came with its own hurdles. Many of the nearby shops either didn't use security systems or used outdated ones with limited angles and poor visibility at night. The few cameras that did capture parts of the street didn't reveal any sign of Lauren during the critical hours. Whatever route she took, it didn't intersect with lenses in a way investigators could use. The lack of footage forced them to rely even more heavily on witness accounts, an uneasy prospect when people's memories degrade so quickly under pressure. Adding to the challenge was the mixed level of cooperation from those closest to Lauren. While Kara provided a detailed account of Lauren's evening, her delays in contacting police had already drawn attention. Friends of Lauren were quick to answer questions, but their stories often highlighted how independent Lauren was, leaving routine gaps in her movements harder to pin down. Some reported attempted calls to Lauren's phone, all of which went straight to voicemail. This indicated the phone may have been turned off or had run out of battery or detail, equally frustrating to both her friends and law enforcement. Meanwhile, police began digging deeper into potential patterns showing why Lauren might have disappeared. In many cases like these, lifestyle factors like dating histories or signs of personal conflict provide valuable leads. Lauren, they found, maintained an active social calendar. It wasn't unusual for her to attend multiple gatherings in a single weekend, though she was also careful to check in with friends on her way between stops. But nothing in her routine indicated a tendency to venture off alone or out of contact for long stretches. By all accounts, she was responsible, organized, and firmly grounded in her community. No one her friends could name currently posed a threat to her, at least not as far as they could tell. To expand their search, officers looked beyond the timeline of the evening and began focusing energy on Lauren's digital footprint. Her phone records and social media accounts might tell more: where she'd been texting from, who she last messaged, or whether she had plans with anyone outside her immediate circle before she vanished. Preliminary searches yielded nothing unusual. Her last text, sent to Kara just before 10 p.m, was tracked to a cell tower near her home. But beyond that, her phone's activity ceased almost entirely. There were no outgoing calls or pings to suggest travel far from her apartment. A second search, in and around the apartment complex, led to another troubling discovery. Close to Lauren's typical walking route, officers found a discarded bracelet in a nearby ditch. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, a small accessory like so many others, but Kara confirmed to police that the bracelet belonged to Lauren. She had been wearing it earlier, Kara noted, and it was unlikely she would have removed it. This discovery fueled speculation that something sudden or forceful had occurred, as opposed to Lauren wandering off voluntarily. The bracelet was the first real clue that Lauren didn't just vanish on her own. A sergeant on the case later recalled, "It's one thing to misplace something, and another to have it left behind like that." But the revelation came with more questions. How did Lauren's bracelet end up off her person in a ditch so close to her route home, yet with no evidence of larger disturbances nearby? Investigators considered possibilities involving robbery or an impulsive act of violence. But with no eyewitnesses to suggest a struggle, the item's presence felt more like a whisper than a statement, a clue that there was much more hidden just out of reach. During these first 48 hours, police worked non-stop to generate any lead, turning to public appeals to prompt witnesses to come forward. But splitting their energy between Lauren's friends, family, and community built its own difficulties. Media outlets began local coverage of her disappearance, airing interviews from tearful loved ones pleading for her safe return. The outpouring of concern flooded the Bloomington police station with hundreds of tips, everything from long-shot sightings at grocery stores to claims of hearing unusual noises the night she vanished. But as promising as some tips sounded, most were hard to substantiate or led nowhere. One piece of information began to shift the course of the case. A man stepped forward, claiming he had seen a woman matching Lauren's description near the corner of College Avenue right around 10:45 p.m. He remembered her passing by as he exited his parked car. But what struck him wasn't just that he'd seen her walking alone, it was the pair of headlights slowing behind her. According to the witness's account, a vehicle moving hesitantly along the curb seemed to match her path for a minute before disappearing into another street nearby. The man couldn't identify the car's make or model, but that brief, suggestive movement was enough to deepen investigators' suspicions. This was the first tangible step in connecting Lauren's disappearance to outside interference. A vehicle following close to a lone figure late at night could mean nothing. It could be everything. It raised unsettling new possibilities that pointed away from chance and towards something calculated. But who was inside that car? And how close had they come to Lauren in those fleeting minutes? As investigators prepared to follow up on this lead, they were faced with a growing realization. Those early hours weren't coming back. The picture of Lauren's disappearance wasn't complete, but with every potential clue, it was growing darker. And now the question wasn't just where she was, but what had brought her there. What else was waiting to be uncovered as they followed the car's shadow into the night? The breakthrough came when investigators received a call from a local property manager about something unusual in their parking lot. It was now almost a week since Lauren had disappeared, and while the investigative team had been chasing leads and mapping out timelines, nothing had led them closer to understanding where she was or what had happened to her. The property manager explained that one of their tenants, noticing an abandoned vehicle parked at the edge of the lot, had alerted them. It wasn't unusual for cars to sit in the lot for a day or two, but this one was different. There was something about its condition that stood out. The vehicle, an older model sedan with faded paint, had its windows rolled down slightly and a layer of dirt streaking its surface. But what really caught their attention was what was inside. On the driver's seat was a smudged handprint that appeared to be in some kind of dried residue. On the passenger side, crumpled clothing and an empty fast food cup lay scattered on the floorboards. The car didn't match any of the current residents at the complex, and neither the property manager nor the tenants could recall seeing who had parked it there. It was clear it hadn't been sitting long. No tickets were left on the windshield, but the fact that it was abandoned indicated someone had walked away on purpose. When police arrived to investigate, they quickly noticed another detail. The vehicle was missing its license plates. This meant tracking the owner wouldn't be as straightforward. A VIN number search would eventually link the car to a nearby dealership, but in the meantime, the car itself would need to be examined carefully. One of the officers on the scene immediately flagged the handprint for further analysis. It was faded, uneven, he later said, but there was enough there to give us something solid to work with. The car was towed to the crime lab, where forensic analysts went over every inch of it. Inside, they found items that could only be described as puzzling. Among them was a partially torn receipt from the bar where Lauren was last seen. Dated the night of her disappearance, the receipt didn't belong to Lauren herself but pointed to someone who had been at the same location. Investigators also recovered a single strand of blonde hair from the back seat. While they couldn't confirm whose it was immediately, its presence raised important questions. Could the vehicle have been connected to Lauren's last movements? And if so, who had been driving it? The receipt became an early focus. It wasn't just another random item, it represented a direct link to the evening Lauren vanished. Officers returned to the bar to pull receipts matching the timestamp. The transaction, paid in cash, couldn't connect to a name directly, but it revealed what had been ordered: 2 drinks and a small food item. Witnesses were brought back in for more questioning. One recalled seeing a man sitting at a corner table, taking occasional glances toward the bar's main door. Another patron recognized the description of the car parked at the complex and mentioned seeing it outside the bar's lot earlier that night. But the driver? No one could describe them clearly. While this clue was enough to reignite the investigation, it also contradicted earlier assumptions. Police had spent much of the first days fixated on Lauren's usual habits and social connections. They'd conducted interviews with friends, former romantic partners, and classmates, working under the theory that someone close to her might hold answers. But this new evidence, the abandoned car and receipt hinted at the involvement of someone outside her circle, an unknown variable that shifted the investigation's scope. The forensic team worked quickly to process the car. Swabs from the smudged handprint on the driver's seat didn't yield enough for identification, but further analysis of the interior uncovered another significant clue. Along the edges of the passenger door, analysts found faint traces of blood. It wasn't visible at first glance, but became clear under testing. The sample was too small to establish a major profile, but preliminary results suggested it matched Lauren's blood type. This changed everything. Until now, Lauren's disappearance had been treated as suspicious, but there was no direct evidence to prove foul play. Now, the presence of the blood brought a darker possibility to the forefront. Detectives began linking this case to similar stories. In missing persons investigations, abandoned vehicles have often been the key to breaking cases wide open. In one well-known case from Arizona in 2013, a missing college student's car was found under similar circumstances, containing seemingly mundane items: an old textbook, a water bottle, and a single shoe. It wasn't much, but it eventually led officers to a suspect who had encountered the victim hours before her disappearance. In Lauren's case, the investigators wondered whether this car would unlock similar answers or leave them chasing dead ends. Still, while the car and its contents raised critical questions, they didn't provide any definitive answers yet. If the receipt and the hair found in the car suggested proximity to Lauren, why had no one noticed this vehicle before? Security footage from the bar parking lot had already been reviewed, but the poor visibility made it impossible to make out license plates or faces of anyone near it. The vague witness descriptions were too broad to rely on, leaving police with only fragmented possibilities. The car dealership linked to the VIN number offered a sliver of insight. They confirmed the sedan had been sold at an auction the month before, but hadn't yet been re-registered under a new owner's name. This added a complication. Whoever was driving the car the night Lauren disappeared hadn't left a trace of themselves behind in official records. Detectives widened their search, turning to neighboring towns and vehicle sightings to see if a pattern emerged. But it was the hair sample that pulled the investigation into sharper focus. When forensic analysts ran DNA testing, the results confirmed what investigators suspected. The sample belonged to Lauren. That single discovery changed the direction of the case entirely. No longer were police searching for someone who simply might have seen Lauren. They were now looking for someone who had her in their vehicle that night. The question of whether she left her apartment voluntarily became irrelevant. What mattered now was who she had encountered, and what role they played in her disappearance. As police followed the threads connecting the vehicle to its broader context, the car opened up more avenues than conclusions. Wherever it had travelled after the night Lauren vanished, it carried her presence with it. But its discovery also exposed holes in the larger story. Why had the car been abandoned less than 3 miles from her apartment? Was it dumped there by someone local? Or was it a convenient spot for a visitor unfamiliar with the area? These uncertainties hung over the investigation as officers began exploring the possibility that Lauren's disappearance was the work of someone who hadn't intended to be caught. While the car offered concrete evidence, tangible remnants of Lauren's last known moments also raised countless new questions. So far, the only person it directly pointed to was Lauren herself, leaving the mystery of the driver unresolved. And, as investigators pushed forward, they began narrowing their sights on uncovering the final, most important question of all: who had been behind the wheel? What lay on the other side of the car's presence would bring the investigation into sharper focus. But the evidence didn't just stop at the driver. There was still the question of what this person knew and how it connected to Lauren's fate. Where the car led next would determine whether this case moved one step closer to resolution or simply deepened the mystery further. Witnesses can often shape the difference between a mystery that drags on for years and one that finds answers quickly. But in Lauren Spierer's case, convincing those who might have seen something to step forward wasn't easy. Lauren vanished on the edge of a bustling college toner place where lives intersect daily, where bars and apartments sit close together, and where dozens of people might have unknowingly crossed her path that night. Despite this, investigators found themselves chasing silence, faces turning away, and answers left half-finished. One of the first barriers investigators encountered was hesitation. Witnesses who had been close to the area near Lauren's apartment or College Avenue admitted they'd been out that night, walking home from bars or hanging out on balconies overlooking the street. Yet when it came to recalling specific details, their answers were vague or inconsistent. Some admitted they didn't pay close attention because late-night comings and goings were common in a college town. Others, however, expressed a more troubling reason. They were scared. One student told police, "I don't know if I feel safe talking about this. What if the person who took her is still around?" Fear played a significant role in how this case unfolded in the critical early days. People often worry that coming forward could expose them to danger, even when they have only tangential information. Police speculated this fear grew as media coverage of Lauren's disappearance intensified. With headlines splashing Lauren's photo across local outlets and her parents making emotional pleas on television, the case felt bigger than ever. Seeing the magnitude of attention, some potential witnesses may have decided it was easier and safer to stay silent, reasoning that their minor observations might not matter in the larger scope of the investigation. But fear wasn't the only obstacle. There was also loyalty. Colleges and their surrounding communities often operate within tight-knit social groups. In the days following Lauren's disappearance, it became evident to police that people in her social circle may have known more than they initially let on. Detectives began revisiting those who had seen Lauren the night she was last spotted. Some admitted they'd noticed others behaving strangely that evening, but they were reluctant to name names. "You don't want to accuse someone without being sure," one friend said during questioning. Others deflected entirely, avoiding follow-up calls or responding vaguely when pressed for details. Part of this hesitation stemmed from the fear of implicating someone who could be innocent of valid concern in any investigation. But it also underscored another truth. Loyalty can be a powerful silencer. For those close to the case, the unspoken rules of social groups protect your friends, avoid gossip, keep quiet unless you're certain became barriers to the flow of critical information. This phenomenon isn't uncommon, especially in cases involving tight communities. People hesitate not just because of fear, but because of the social cost of speaking up. Distrust also played a role. Though Bloomington was generally a safe area with a good relationship between law enforcement and its college population, there were still pockets of suspicion. Some students expressed that they didn't entirely trust police to protect their identity or handle information sensitively. One witness shared this sentiment, saying she worried about her name being attached to the case without her control. Police tried to address these concerns through anonymous tips, lines, and assurances that witnesses wouldn't be exposed unnecessarily. Still, trust is hard to build once doubt takes hold, especially in a case this high profile, where media coverage made every development a headline. Recognizing the need to approach witnesses carefully, investigators switched tactics. They began conducting targeted interviews in neutral locations, giving witnesses an opportunity to talk without feeling scrutinized. Officers canvassed the area surrounding Lauren's apartment, speaking to neighbors who may have noticed anything unusual that night. They also put up posters and left contact information in mailboxes to encourage tips, particularly from those who might not feel comfortable speaking face-to-face. In many instances, even indirect observation sharing the sound of footsteps, seeing a car slow down resolved small pieces of the investigative puzzle. But still, the lack of definitive developments was frustrating. How could no one have seen more? Public appeals were another important strategy. Lauren's family directly addressed the community in an emotional plea, asking for cooperation and urging anyone with even the smallest detail to contact police. They made it clear they weren't trying to cast blame, but simply find answers. "We know someone out there knows something," her father said during a television appearance. "We're asking, no, begging you to do the right thing and help bring Lauren home." The appeals sparked some movement. Tips began to trickle in, though not all of them led anywhere. One caller claimed they'd seen a woman matching Lauren's description get into a car with two men near a convenience store, but when police reviewed surveillance footage, they found no such interaction occurred at the stated time. The witness later admitted their memory might have been compromised by alcohol. As police sorted through tips, they began using surveillance in areas where eyewitness accounts seemed unreliable. They set up patrols near College Avenue and monitored traffic around the apartment complex where Lauren lived, hoping for repeated patterns or encounters that might hint at someone hanging around too often. Surveillance allowed investigators to fill gaps where human recollection faltered, providing a clearer view of who frequented the area and when. But even with these additional efforts, no single lead emerged strong enough to push the case forward until someone unexpected stepped up. A reluctant witnesser regular at the bar Lauren had visited that night eventually contacted police. They explained they hadn't come forward earlier because they weren't sure what they'd seen and didn't want to get involved in something bigger than they could handle. But after talking to a friend, they realized withholding what they knew could mean leaving the family without answers. The witness described parking their car near College Avenue and noticing a man standing beside an older sedan, possibly the same one linked to the abandoned vehicle police later found. The man appeared agitated, pacing along the sidewalk and glancing frequently toward the bar's entrance. The witness couldn't confirm they saw Lauren interact directly with him, but they said his body language seemed unusual, like he was waiting for something or someone. This tip was far from the smoking gun investigators hoped for, but it put renewed energy into their efforts. Combined with earlier testimony that a car had been seen following Lauren, it gave the abandoned vehicle a sharper context. It also corroborated theories that someone outside of Lauren's immediate circle might have played a role in her disappearance. The pacing man likely knew Lauren was there or, worse, had intentionally targeted her. Though the witness couldn't provide a full description of the man or his intentions, their testimony shifted the focus of the investigation. Now, police were certain the car wasn't just a coincidence. It was a piece of a larger story, one of movement, hesitation, and someone waiting for the exact right moment to act. Investigators fanned out with renewed purpose, knowing this witness's information might create the chain reaction they desperately needed. If this new lead had substance, it could change everything. Who was the man loitering near the car, and how did his actions intersect with Lauren's timeline? Witness reluctance once, a barrier was finally beginning to erode, making way for details that could reshape the investigation entirely. The car was no longer just evidence of Lauren's absence. It was now a marker of possibility, guiding police closer to a startling truth they couldn't yet see. What did this man know, and why had he stood in the shadows of that night, pacing as though something unimaginable was about to happen? In the days following Lauren's disappearance, the investigation remained focused on finding a missing person. There was still no clear evidence of foul play, no confirmed sightings, and no definitive indication that anything beyond an unexpected absence had occurred. But as days stretched into a week, and the evidence began piling up in unsettling ways, the tone of the investigation shifted. At what point does a disappearance, marked by unanswered calls and vague timelines, become something far more sinister? For investigators, that moment came when patterns began, forming patterns that didn't just hint at danger, but pointed directly toward it. The shift started with the forensic discoveries tied to the abandoned vehicle. The bracelet left in the ditch was one thing it could be explained as accidental, easily dropped. But the faint traces of blood found inside the car told a different story. That small detail forced investigators to confront an uncomfortable reality. If Lauren had been in that car at all, she hadn't left on her own terms. What cemented their suspicions further was the confirmation that a strand of hair recovered from the vehicle belonged to Lauren. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial anymore. It was physical, tangible, and it pointed to something far more deliberate than a college student losing her way. At this stage, law enforcement brought in specialized units to expand their reach and capabilities. Missing persons detectives became criminal investigators overnight. Analysts trained in major cases joined the effort, revisiting early witness statements and combing through new tips that continued pouring in. A team of forensic experts returned to the scene with fresh eyes, this time treating it as a potential crime scene rather than just the last place Lauren had been seen. Even tracking dogs were brought into the wooded areas around College Avenue, tasked with picking up what limited scent trails still lingered after days of summer heat and passing traffic. The transition wasn't immediate, but it was deliberate. Detectives understood what each new clue suggested, even if they weren't ready to make it public just yet. Cases like Lauren's often reach this transition point quietly, with no grand announcements or dramatic discoveries. Instead, it's a gradual realization evidence stacking higher and higher until no other explanation makes sense. By the end of the first week, the timeline of Lauren's last known movements had been revised and tightened. Investigators now knew she had left the bar just after 10:30 p.m. She had been seen briefly by a passerby, walking with purpose toward her apartment complex. Yet, somewhere between College Avenue and home, she vanished. Accounts of a car following her along the curb gained weight when combined with the witness who described seeing a man pacing near an older sedan. These fragments of information painted a troubling picture. Lauren's disappearance was now more than a personal tragedy, it was beginning to look like a crime. But even as investigators leaned into this new theory, they faced significant hurdles. Legally, Treating a missing persons case as a criminal investigation requires meeting specific criteria. Without definitive signs of foul play, law enforcement must tread carefully to avoid crossing boundaries or violating rights. Bloomington detectives relied on procedural tools to navigate this thin line. They obtained search warrants for the abandoned car and for nearby properties matching the vehicle's registered location. With legal processes in motion, they ensured that any evidence uncovered would hold up in court if when it became necessary. Additionally, they ramped up public engagement. If Lauren had been taken by someone connected to her or merely passing through town, someone in the area would likely have seen or heard something unusual. Detectives made another public appeal using local news outlets, emphasizing the need for new witnesses and asking for any dashcam footage from drivers who had been near College Avenue that night. They explained that even seemingly insignificant details like seeing a car parked oddly or spotting someone walking quickly away could add context. The appeal yielded limited results, but it sent a clear signal. This wasn't just a matter of waiting for Lauren to return. The investigation was moving forward, and everything was on the table. By now, mounting evidence had begun reshaping theories within the department. Early suspicions about whether Lauren could have left voluntarily were all but dismissed. Investigators were increasingly confident that someone else's actions were involved. This was never a simple case of someone wanting to disappear. One officer later remarked, "Lauren had habits, patterns, people she cared about. The kind of person she was, it didn't match." The focus narrowed toward figuring out who had crossed paths with Lauren that night and what their intentions were. While the transition to a criminal case brought clarity in some ways, it also raised troubling questions. Detectives expanded their search to neighboring towns and counties, widening their net to include individuals with prior records near Bloomington. They also began re-interviewing people who had interacted with Lauren regularly, looking for inconsistencies in their memories or behavior. Kara's timeline, which had already faced scrutiny in earlier stages of the investigation, came under renewed examination. She remained cooperative, providing additional details about Lauren's habits and acquaintances. But detectives couldn't shake a fundamental uncertainty. How well did Kara really know her roommate? Could she have overlooked or withheld information about someone potentially dangerous in Lauren's life? One major challenge came from the lack of definitive eyewitness testimony. Multiple people claimed to have seen Lauren walking alone that night, but none could confirm interactions with anyone else. The moment she stepped out of sight, it was as though she had simply vanished. This invisibility made it crucial for investigators to rely on evidence outside of human memory surveillance footage, cell phone data, and forensic discoveries. But here, too, frustration lingered. Security cameras along College Avenue provided little clarity, capturing only blurred shadows and indistinguishable figures. And Lauren's phone, which had stopped transmitting signals by midnight, offered no further clue to her whereabouts. Among the biggest procedural changes during this phase was the involvement of criminal profiling experts. Drawing from patterns in similar cases, they constructed potential behavioral profiles of who might have been responsible for Lauren's disappearance. Profilers considered the abandoned vehicle, the body language of the man seen pacing, and the lack of physical struggle reported near Lauren's last location. These details pointed to someone methodical, not impulsive, but opportunistic. They knew how to blend into the environment, a profiler speculated. Someone who doesn't stand out but strikes when the opportunity feels right. The ability to transition a case like this requires balancing hope with reality, a challenge for both law enforcement and Lauren's family. Publicly, statements remained focused on finding Lauren alive. Her parents continued to emphasize her vibrant personality and their belief that she could still be brought home. Privately, however, detectives were preparing for every possible outcome. Autopsy protocols were quietly reviewed. Crime scene processes were discussed. And while no one spoke about it directly, the presence of blood in the abandoned car loomed quietly over every conversation. That small stain had made it impossible to ignore the worst possibilities. When law enforcement finally made their formal announcement, there was no going back. The case of Lauren Spierer's disappearance was now considered a potential criminal act. They didn't discuss specific suspects, yet there wasn't enough to go public, but the shift in tone marked an important turning point. This wasn't just a search for a missing woman anymore. It was an active pursuit of answers in what was likely an abduction or worse. The police chief addressed the public in a somber press conference, thanking everyone who had come forward and urging anyone with additional information to do the same. He explained that while Lauren's disappearance was still being treated as a missing persons case technically, investigators were now focusing their resources on uncovering who might have been involved. "This isn't over," he said firmly, and we're not stopping until we have the truth. Although the announcement offered no immediate breakthroughs, it injected urgency into the community. Suddenly, people who had felt uneasy before were reconsidering whether what they'd seen or heard might matter. The transition to a criminal investigation often has that effect, moving a case from uncertainty into the realm of possibility. But beyond the procedural shift came an even heavier question. If this was truly someone else's doing, then who was the person behind it? What was this new turn in the investigation leading toward? And would the next discovery bring clarity or deepen the unsettling unknown? The disappearance of Lauren Spierer left a heavy mark on the small, tight-knit community of Bloomington, Indiana. Her face became imprinted on the consciousness of everyone who walked its street-share photo on every lamppost, her name in every conversation. But years after she vanished, the questions surrounding her case remain as haunting as the night she disappeared. How does a case like this, unsolved and shrouded in unknowns, affect those it touches? More importantly, what does it leave behind? For Lauren's family, the impact has been profound and unrelenting. Her parents, Robert and Charlene, poured themselves into the search, spearheading efforts to keep their daughter's story alive in the press and the public eye. They were relentless in their calls for answers, having traveled to Bloomington numerous times in the months after Lauren's disappearance, speaking at vigils and press conferences with a sense of purpose that never seemed to fade. "We want her to be found," her mother said in one televised interview. "No matter what the outcome is, we just need to know where she is." Their love for Lauren and their refusal to let her case fade into obscurity became a rallying cry for many in the community. The family's determination had a ripple effect in Bloomington, one that reshaped the way students and locals alike thought about safety in public spaces. Before Lauren disappeared, Indiana University was seen as a generally secure campus, with the surrounding area often described as a place where students felt comfortable walking late at night. Lauren's case, however, highlighted vulnerabilities in everyday routine. A familiar walk home could turn into an unspeakable tragedy in the blink of an eye. Parents of students began asking tougher questions about campus security and student behavior, pushing for more visible patrols and better lit pathways. Many students, particularly women, became more cautious, opting to stay in groups or take ride shares instead of walking alone. Local law enforcement also faced scrutiny. While Bloomington's police force had mobilized quickly to investigate Lauren's disappearance, the public couldn't help but question whether earlier involvement could have made a difference. Missing persons cases are notoriously difficult in their early hours, especially when delays in reporting complicate the timeline. In Lauren's case, the time lost during the night she disappeared could never be regained. While officers worked tirelessly to make up for that, the lingering sense that something vital had slipped away remained. Some community members speculated that police might have approached the case differently if clear signs of foul play had been recognized earlier. Others defended the department, arguing that hindsight can make even the best efforts seem inadequate. One area where the case had an undeniable impact was in conversations about personal responsibility and bystander awareness. Friends and peers who had been with Lauren the night she vanished found themselves grappling with difficult questions. Could they have done more to ensure her safety? Should someone have walked her home? "We all assumed she'd be fine," one friend admitted years later. "None of us thought for a second that something bad could happen. Not here." That sense of assumed safety was a comfort that Lauren's disappearance shattered for many young people in the area. It wasn't just about what Lauren's friends could have done differently. It was a broader reckoning with how we support and protect each other in moments that feel mundane until it's too late. The unanswered questions in Lauren's case also reignited debates about how communities handle fear and uncertainty when the unthinkable happens. For every witness who spoke up, there were countless others who stayed silent, whether out of fear, reluctance, or simply uncertainty about what they'd seen. That silence has haunted the case, with detectives repeatedly emphasizing how even the smallest detail could provide a breakthrough. Was it fear of judgment or reprisal that kept potential witnesses quiet? Or was it a symptom of something deeper, an instinct to avoid entangling oneself in something so steeped in tragedy and scrutiny? Experts in criminal justice have pointed to Lauren's case as an example of how vital community cooperation is in missing persons investigations. One former detective spoke about the psychological barriers often faced by witnesses in cases like this. "People think their information has to be groundbreaking to matter, but that's rarely true," he explained. "It's the accumulation of small details, timelines, behaviors, things that seem slightly off that solve cases. But people don't realize that until it's too late." This insight only deepened the frustration surrounding Lauren's disappearance. If one witness, just one, had come forward with something definitive in those early days, Would it have changed the trajectory of the investigation? The thought lingers, gnawing at those closest to the case. The broader legacy of Lauren's case extends beyond Bloomington. While headlines about her disappearance may have faded from the national spotlight, the lessons it left behind continue to influence public perception about personal safety and missing persons awareness. Universities across the country have taken proactive steps to emphasize safety measures for students, citing cases like Lauren's as reminders of what can happen even in seemingly low-risk environments. Campus escort programs have expanded, and awareness campaigns now stress the importance of looking out for one another and reporting anything that feels out of place. As one student activist put it, "What happened to Lauren reminds us that no one is invincible. It could happen anywhere, and to anyone." Her case also brought renewed attention to systemic issues in how missing persons cases are handled, particularly those involving young adults. Advocates have used Lauren's story to highlight the need for faster response times, better communication between departments, and broader public education about what to do when someone goes missing. The lessons aren't just procedural, they're emotional, too. The anguish of Lauren's family serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of unresolved cases. For every statistic or policy reform, there is a mother, a father, a friend left in perpetual limbo, holding on to hope while grappling with the weight of unknowing. Still, as much as Lauren's case has inspired change, it remains defined by its unanswered questions. The abandoned car, the faint blood evidence, the witness descriptions of a strange reach piece of the puzzle seemed like it should lead somewhere, but none have provided the clarity needed to solve the case. Was the driver of that car a drifter passing through town, or was it someone Lauren knew? And why, after over a decade, has no one stepped forward to fill in the gaps? These questions haunt not only Lauren's family but also the investigators who devoted countless hours to finding her. One retired officer involved in the case admitted, "You don't forget something like this. You think about the what-ifs every day." Despite these lingering doubts, those who knew Lauren choose to focus on her life as much as her loss. Friends remember her as someone who lit up every room she entered, a young woman who balanced her studies with a vibrant social life and always made time for the people she cared about. Her parents continue to fight for answers, not just for their daughter but for the countless other families facing similar heartbreak. Their resilience, in the face of so much uncertainty, is a testament to how love and grief can coexist and how justice is something worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes. Of course, there's always the possibility that new developments could emerge. Cases that seem frozen in time have been solved decades later by advances in technology, unexpected witness accounts, or breakthroughs in DNA analysis. The slightest shift in circumstances, a misplaced confession, a memory jogged, could finally bring clarity. And as Lauren's story continues to be shared, there's always hope that someone, somewhere, holds a key piece of information that will one day come to light. Until that day comes, Lauren's case remains a powerful reminder of how fragile and interconnected our lives are. It's a story about loss, but also about resilience, the resilience of a community to demand answers, of a family to keep searching, and of people everywhere to reflect on what it means to create a safer world for everyone. These are the lessons we can never forget. And most of all, it's Lauren herself who must remain at the center of it all, not just as a missing person, but as a daughter, a friend, and someone whose story continues to matter deeply. Lauren Spierer's case reminds us how rapidly the ordinary can turn into a life-altering mystery. A young woman steps out on a familiar path, and in minutes, everything changes. Her story underscores the fragility of routine, the importance of urgency, and the lasting weight unanswered questions place on families and communities. As we reflect on Lauren's disappearance, it's clear her case is not just about what was lost, but what might still remain hidden. If her story tells us anything, it's this. Even the smallest detail can bring answers. Perhaps someone out there holds the key to finding them,